And we are back. You are chatting with John P. Today we are going to be talking about the absolute best wristwatches under $100. That's right, $100 US. Now, two disclaimers here. One, in no way, shape, or form or method am I saying that any of these watches rival a higher price point Swiss watch or German-made manufacturer watch. I'm just not saying that, but what I am saying is in this price point, which is difficult to get it into, $100 or below, these are the ones that I would recommend to someone that absolutely was tied to this range. Now, I'd probably try to push you up just a little bit higher into 500 if you could save for it, but I'll talk about that when we get there. Just had to lay that on you as a disclaimer. But first, I'd like to thank you for being with me for another episode here. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It is appreciated. And once again, thanks so much for helping me hit that 10,000 subscriber point. And you can check out delraywatch.com where wristwatch tech, we have this Reverso that's incredibly awesome. Looks a lot like the vintage original Reversos that were used by polo players and noblemen in Europe. This is a dress watch today, but it once was a sports watch because you flip it over and it protects from all of the elements on the polo field. So let's jump right into this. I've got my laptop over here with some pictures so I can kind of refresh my memory with some of these pieces because it's been a while, and I've also got some other things here that I'd like to share with you when we get to it. But let's jump into the first watch right away. Absolutely no contest with this one. It's the Swatch System 51. Now, if you're not familiar, this watch debuted at Baselworld 2013, and it was kind of, I don't want to say a new and novel idea because Swatch has been making disposable watches in the past, but what this does a little bit differently is it's a disposable automatic Swiss wristwatch, and the retail prices kind of vary now, anywhere between $200 down to even $75 US, getting into the pre-owned market. So if you hunt for a bit, you can easily get this for $100. And what makes this watch unique and special is that it's comprised of 51 parts, and there is one central screw with the way that the architecture works on this. There's a screw type part that holds 5 different modules together that allow this watch to work. And interestingly enough, the crown kind of works backwards compared to any other type of automatic Swiss wristwatch. For example, when you wind it, you turn it the other way, and setting the time can be a little bit tricky if you've not played with the Swatch System 51, but you're getting a Swiss automatic wristwatch for in that price point. I think it's pretty incredible, and it's from the same holding company that owns brands like Omega and produces Edda Movement. So how can you go wrong? Sure, the entire watch is pretty much made by machines and robots for the most part, but at that price point, it's a no-brainer, and it's number one on not only my list, but pretty much everyone's list when we're talking about this category. The downside is, even though it's an automatic wristwatch, which normally you can service, this watch just cannot be serviced. It's hermetically sealed. The Swatch does provide a more than sufficient warranty if there's any problems, but if you do have any problems, you pretty much have to throw it away, and they will do the same. If you take them this watch and you say, hey, I'm having problems, they'll give you another one, which could be problematic if it's sentimental or the model is just not produced. Talking about this even more, I did own one of these once upon a time, but I gave it away to viewers like you in a little bit of a giveaway that we had. But the issue does come that they produce so many different versions of the watch. If you're kind of tied and you grow a liking to a certain model, the color scheme may be gone and there's something different. So something to keep in mind, but at this price point, how can you go wrong? Now, the next one is we have a Timex. Now, Timex is a brand that has really never been known for its highest quality, but it's been known more for its utility value and approachability. This one is the Timex Marlin, which does have a retail price today of around $200, but gray market and pre-owned, $100 or under, no problem. So the watch itself is generally an American brand, but of course they do produce basically the entire watch overseas in mostly parts of Asia. The movement is a Chinese manual wound movement, which doesn't have a lot of information circling around about it, but at this price point, it's really more just kind of the style and just the fact that it keeps time more so than how accurate or the parts that are used into it. I think with watches, as fellow watch guys, we can kind of scrutinize the little itty bits and pieces and parts and different things about the watch, and when we're in this price point, once again, I think it comes down to really how it looks, and how this watch looks is a lot like the original Timex Marlin or the vintage Timex watches that came out in I believe the late 50s or early 60s. So I think Timex knocks it out of the park in terms of the style here. I think they do a really great job. It looks just like the watches that were out in the 50s and 60s. It's a piece of American history and certainly wristwatch history. Get one of these for $100, a nice, cool, casual, dressier watch, and don't look back, even if it's for your daily wear or beater, or maybe it's your first watch as a professional. Something to consider, and it's on my list. Next we have a Seiko. Now, if you've been watching this channel, let me just switch the picture here. If you've been watching this channel, you know that I probably don't talk about Seiko a whole lot. I think that Seiko does some things very well. I think they make a mechanical wristwatch that's approachable and will work. Now, when we talk about this price point, absolutely Seiko has to be on the list because they do put into their processes and procedures using the whole kind of Toyota assembly line, that whole lean mentality when it comes to processing and manufacturing. And with a Japanese brand like Seiko, of course it's going to follow through, and you're going to see that in their items here. So this is a Seiko SNK807. It's a 37 millimeter Seiko watch. It's a sports watch. They put it on this kind of NATO-esque nylon or canvas strap, depending on how you want to call it. But nonetheless, at this price point, which you can get these things at roughly $100 US, maybe $80 US, new, gray market, you can't really go wrong. It's got a day, it's got a date, which at this price point is not that common. It's got a Seiko movement. Now, this Seiko movement is the 7S26, which is only rated for -20 plus 49 seconds per day. And so, while at the $100 price point, this is a great deal, something to keep in mind is if you want to get into something like this and try to compare it to some of their more professional lines where they do keep much better specs, or their ratings for the watch movements keep much better specs, you just can't expect it at this price point from this movement. Now, that doesn't mean you couldn't find someone that can regulate this thing to keep a little bit better time, but it's probably going to fall out of spec. And once again, this is a watch that you shouldn't try to beat up too much because it does a lot of things great. It has a cool design. It's sporty. It's unique. It's got that field watch feel about it, and it can really take a beating as well. So give or take a few seconds per day, if not 49 seconds per day, and I think you can get yourself into a pretty good watch at this price point. Now, this is going to be the only quartz watch on the list, and I have to talk about it because it's not only a watch icon, but a pop icon and basically a consumer electronics icon. This is the Casio GShock. Now, we'll have a picture here, but this isn't necessarily the one I'm talking about. I'm just talking about Casio GShocks. Generally speaking, any Casio GShock that you can get $100 or under, which has been so many over the years. They really have so many limited editions, partnerships, I think, with, Gundam and, Disney and other pop icons, and that's cool from a style perspective. And they have a Baby G line, which is smaller, more aimed towards women. They do a lot of things. Sure, they're digital watches. Sometimes they have analog displays like you see here, but they're quartz driven, but they're extremely durable. So GShock was essentially invented in around 1981 by a guy named Kikuo Ibe, and yep, my Japanese is not that great, so someone leave in the comments below the pronunciation on that. But basically, he was an engineer for Casio, which was a consumer electronics company. They do various other things, but that's kind of what they were doing in that time period. And he designed this with the idea that the battery would last for 10 years, it would have 10 meters water resistance, and it could survive a shock 10 feet tall. Now, this being said, modern day G-Shocks can certainly outperform this, but that was the general idea behind the watch. And so in 1983, the watch was like, it hit the market. It just hit the market so hard, and it was an immediate success, and people just began buying these things left and right. You know, in the 80s, it was still kind of that quartz era, that quartz crisis era still for the most part, and so it didn't really bother anyone that a sports watch was quartz driven. And the great thing about this watch is, for the time, there were just not that many extreme shock resistant watches, and how they pulled this off was basically they put the quartz movement, or the module rather, because depending on the functions, it was really a module. They put it in a bit of a cradle. And so using some plastics and some other materials, they put the module in a cradle so that when the watch took a shock, it would kind of just bounce around in there, and it would act as a bit of a suspension. And that was extremely novel for watches, but definitely consumer electronics. And you know, from celebrities to Justin Bieber's to even watch geeks, G-Shocks are usually floating around in someone's collection, even if they don't wear them a lot. So it's kind of difficult to avoid them, and certainly you can't go wrong at that price point. So we could talk about G-Shocks all day, because it really starts delving deeper into electronics and pop culture, which is obviously a very deep topic. But we'll move on to the last watch, which is going to be the Orient Mako. Now, if you're an Orient guy, an Orient collector, and there's a whole community of guys out there, you'll know right away, and you'll make a distinction in your head in probably the comments below, that there are so many different versions of the Mako, there's so many different dials, there's a couple of sizes, as well as different movements that were used. There's a Mako 2, and there are some distinctions between the models. Now, the one that we'll talk about here is pretty much Orient's take on the Submariner, though it has a day-date complication. But of course, you know, the Rolex Submariner does not have that. And once again, the retail on this is a bit higher than 100, but you can find them floating around gray market and pre-owned at the 100. And I think that if you're in that range, you can hunt just a little bit to pull this one off. So basically, this is, you know, an affordable dive watch. Most of them are 200 meters rated. It does not have a sapphire crystal, but that's not that common at a $100 price point. It has a mineral crystal, day-date complication. And at this price point, I don't know what other divers that you can get that are going to be a mechanical automatic diver. It has the day-date complication, and they make a Pepsi version, I think a Hulk version. So if you're in this price point, you can kind of get that Rolex look without the Rolex buck, right? So that's kind of where we're at on this one. And so I think it's interesting to note that in 2007, Seiko, through one of their companies they own, began taking a more controlling stake in the Orient brand, and now they totally own Orient. So it's interesting to think about, perhaps either now or previously or in the future, Seiko might be introducing some more of their parts and procedures and processes from things that made their brands and watches so successful into Orient. But I think that Orient does have quite a following in this segment, and certainly in kind of the more culty niche watch group. So I don't think you can go wrong if you're looking for a Submariner alternative at $100 or under. Actually, I don't know of any others that are mechanical that can say that. So guys, this has been the watches that I think are the best at the $100 or under price point. Once again, you might have to hunt around a little bit, but certainly you can find them, because I found them before shooting this video. And one little bonus watch or suggestion I would say is, if none of these really appeal to you and you still are in that price point for whatever reason, go on eBay and hunt around a little bit. Sure, it can be a bit of a minefield, but I know that sometimes there's no-name vintage watches that have, you know, Swiss movements and look to be pretty decent quality for that price that you can sometimes get at this $100 or under price point. It might need a service, which is going to drive up the total cost of ownership, but it's another option for you if none of these really fit the bill of what you're looking for. So guys, do you have any other suggestions for this price point? Leave in the comments below. I'd love to hear the types of watches that you're getting at this $100 price point. I find it incredibly fascinating, and I think all of these are decent suggestions. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It really does help me. And of course, DelReyWatch.com, where you can check out this very cool Reverso and a bunch of other very cool, interesting watches that we spend a lot of time hunting down for you, fellow watch collectors. Thanks, guys. You have been chatting with John P. Ciao.